Chapter 1 of Part 2: The Tragedy of the Unemployed Student. The Nazi doctrine as expounded is alarming because it is such a jumble of good and bad ideas. Even when the ideas are good, they are worked out in bad ways, and it is obvious that in repeating all sorts of Nazi cliches, many of the young men do not recognize the significance of what they say, or the sinister consequences of all this superficial claptrap. Far more revolting than these ignorant young enthusiasts were the middle-aged men who had been second-rate teachers and lecturers, but who, owing to their devotion to the party, were given positions of responsibility and at times professorships. A week or two after hearing and deploring these second-rate scholars, I stayed with friends in the Rhineland. The parents, cultured and Christian, were anti-Nazi, but all their children, including a brilliant son, had joined the party, and their home was a meeting place for the children and their young Nazi friends. "Sometimes," said the father, "I am inclined to forbid them to enter the house, for I feel it is being defiled by much of their silly talk, and it is not easy for the older generation to be treated like a pack of fools by some of these ardent and ignorant young men. Most of all do I regret that people, like my eldest son and some of his friends who have good brains, should be so easily misled by much that is utterly false and even ridiculous. But of course they have had a hard time in former years, because two of my boys were unemployed for a long time, and they felt their training at the university was useless, and now at last they know they are wanted and have a chance at leadership and authority." His wife, who had been silent until now, joined in and said, "I know my husband is right, that this Nazi business is vile, but formerly it was terrible to see the children so unhappy and useless. I hope that if many like our boys go into the party, perhaps they can do something to improve it. It is wonderful what my sons have done for some of the boys in this town already. You would not recognize them, for they have become different altogether in body and spirit. They were just wasting on the streets, and now they have a new self-respect." My wife says truly that superficially this movement seems to have done much, but I know something of the people who are in control, and behind all the youthful enthusiasm there is much that is dark and ugly. Any movement that degrades standards of learning, mocks the Christian religion, and denies the right of free speech must end in disaster. But I think my wife is right that we should let my sons and their friends meet in our house, but that, as she says, we should try in every way to let them see we stand for certain positive values which are irreconcilable with Nazi teaching. Of course, by doing this, we run certain risks, as some of these young fanatics may decide to report what I say to the Gestapo." Then, dropping his voice, he added thoughtfully, "My own son, the really clever one, sometimes I wonder if even he might not do that." "Hans, how can you say such things?" cried his wife. "My dear, I will tell you why. It is not that Walter does not love us, but he has been more hurt and disillusioned by his long unemployment than most, and in order to accept the Nazi teaching, he must all the time suppress his intellect and be dishonest, in a sense. Sometimes I think that what we in this home stand for are an almost unbearable challenge to him, and that one day he may become so hurt by it that he will take the way of the fanatic and harm those who challenge him most deeply." His wife turned to me and said, "Don't take my husband too seriously. Today he is much depressed, for he had such great hopes of his sons. Of course all his fears are groundless." Were they, I wondered, for there are stories of just such parents being betrayed by their children. Among the friends who came in constantly to visit this house was a young doctor of philosophy whom I had met on one or two occasions before, both in England and Germany. He was one of the students who during his university days would not have been able to continue his studies if it had not been for the relief that had been given to him by the International Student Services. This organization after the last war went into the universities to help students in need in all the countries that had been at war, and among the students helped was my friend Wilhelm. He had visited England, which he admired greatly, and was anxious that the two countries should be friends. Wilhelm knew I was staying with his friends and came in for coffee one afternoon. He realized that I was surprised and distressed to see him in full Nazi attire. So having got me alone, he said, "Could you spend a few hours in Cologne tomorrow? It is not far from here, and I am told you have recently been with English friends in Berlin meeting some of our Nazi leaders. I care so much, more than anything, that my English friends should understand this movement and should not believe all the lies about it in the foreign papers. Could we talk about it together?" "All right, Wilhelm. Let us meet in the big hotel near Cologne station and have coffee there tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. "That is excellent," he said. And then almost to himself he added, "It is easier to talk in a big hotel, because in a restaurant you are much nearer other people." I sat in the corner of the large lounge and watched Wilhelm enter the next morning. My corner was rather dark, and it took him a moment or two to find me. He was a handsome young man of just under 6 feet in height, slender in build, with dark hair and eyes and a sensitive and extremely intelligent face. His uniform was beautifully cut and became him well, for in those days the SS uniform had not yet become the symbol of all that is bestial and insolent. Wilhelm came from a simple middle-class home, but his bearing was aristocratic and his intellect penetrating. It seemed impossible that he should pay even lip service to the kind of nonsense that a man like Daimler was writing. We ordered our coffee, and he inquired eagerly, "Who were the British group of educationalists you took to Berlin, and who were the lecturers on the Nazi side?" I showed him the program, and when he had glanced at it, he said, "Tell me, did your people see something of the inspiration of the philosophy of our new movement in Germany?" To which I replied, "Wilhelm, how can you ask me that? It is a rotten philosophy, and those of us who know and love Germany feel humiliated that a country so famed for scholarship should have such second-rate people teaching in your universities." Almost angrily he replied, "Oh, you have grown so old in your country that you do not know new wine when it is there." Old wine or new wine, it is rotten, Wilhelm. And not only am I distressed for your country that so many are being misled, but I cannot think what you are doing to your mind if you allow yourself to accept such stuff as that. There was silence for a time, and I realized that Wilhelm was almost too deeply moved to speak. When he did, his face was pale as he turned to me and said very quietly, "For God's sake, don't raise any further conflict for me." He then started talking of his student days. "Do you remember the days of international student service, and the terrible struggle it was for some of us to remain at the university? We stuck it out because we really believed in two things. The first was that we were needed by our country. The desolation left by the last war meant that Germany was in great need of trained men of all sorts, and that we should really be wanted in the reconstruction of everything here. The second thing was we all belonged to the international youth movements, because we thought the League of Nations meant that there was going to be more chance of understanding. It was enough that our fathers had killed one another, and we were determined it should not happen to us. You know something of how hard it was to struggle on at the university, and many of us could only do it because it seemed here was a future worth preparing for. Do you remember, for instance, my friend Karl, the medical student in Leipzig? But I will tell you about him later." "But," I interrupted, "Karl was brilliant. Surely there was room for him as a doctor?" "There wasn't room for any of us," he said. "My generation that worked so hard and with such terrible suffering just was not wanted. Karl is dead." "At the end of my time at the university," he continued, "I was unemployed for a year, so I went back to do some research work in the hope that perhaps times would improve. But for 5 years I remained unemployed, and was broken in body and spirit, and I learned how stupid were all my dreams in those hard days at the university. I was not wanted by Germany, and certainly if I was not wanted here, I was not wanted anywhere in the world. Even more futile were our international youth movements, for the League of Nations was not interested in peace. It was only interested in maintaining the status quo, and it never had the courage to put anything right in Europe. Heavens, how the younger crowd were duped into false hopes for the future. At any rate, life became for me completely hopeless. Just then I was introduced to Hitler. You won't understand, and I cannot explain either, because I don't know what happened, but life for me took on a tremendous new significance. After all, Germany would rise again. After all, I was wanted. I have since committed myself, body, soul, and spirit, to this movement for the resurrection of Germany. I can only tell you that I cannot go back. I cannot question. I am pledged. I beg you not to try to set up conflict in my mind. I dare not let that happen, for I am as much committed to Hitler as the fundamentalist is to his Bible. Believe me, I cannot face uncertainty and conflict again. No, for me it is Hitler and the resurrection of Germany on one side, or suicide on the other. I have chosen Hitler. Leave me in peace with my choice. By the way, talking of suicide, that was the way Karl took. But, I said, the professors at Leipzig told me Karl was one of the finest students they had ever known. What do you mean? There must have been a place for him. God, how awful it was, he replied. You remember he had no home. His father died of wounds after the war, and his mother had died when he was very young. Perhaps you didn't know that for the last 2 years of his student days in Leipzig he took a job as a night watchman and sat by a fire in one of those huts by the roadside. He used to study all night with a lantern, and then get a few hours sleep before going to the university, and again before he went on night duty. It meant he did not have to pay for lodgings, and if he was ever free in the holidays, he used to come along to me. In spite of all, his work was excellent, but his health could not stand it, and when he was qualified, and I think might have been given one of the few jobs going, he was turned down because they feared TB. He left me a note and went out that night and shot himself. It was always the same story. I am no longer of any use to anyone. Wilhelm turned on me again, almost angrily, and said, How can you and your country just criticize and say we are anti-Christian? And maybe some silly things are said by some leaders in the party, but tell me, is it not religious to believe that there is a purpose for everyone in this life? For myself, I am again religious, for I now believe that I was created for something, and that there is design and meaning in life, whereas for 5 years I could see none, not only for myself, but for my generation and for my country. We were left out. Now even if war comes and we die for a purpose, the rebirth of Germany. You keep on talking of lack of freedom, but if you look at the young generation in Germany today, you will see they have a wonderful new freedom, born of a devotion to a great task which demands their all. We cannot help it that some of the middle-aged churchmen are disgruntled. They have failed to save Germany, so we must do it. I agree, he added, that sometimes the approach to the churches has been clumsy, but they have been so blind that it is their own fault. I see it this way. Here is a movement, chiefly of the young, but open to all, which demands the total mobilization of the spiritual as well as the material resources of the country. We dare not, and in fact cannot, accept our tremendous task unless we can bring into our service all the available resources of strength. Therefore, I think the churches simply must come in. But, Wilhelm, I said, surely you see that you cannot talk about the spiritual resources of the church as though they were bits of meat you put into a sausage machine to help make it up. The church has her beliefs and creeds, and her life cannot possibly be separated from her faith. A great many things are happening now which no one thought could happen, he replied. But I don't think we get anywhere by arguing, because I and thousands upon thousands of others are living by an experience which people outside just don't understand. But as we achieve the resurrection of Germany, I hope you and my English friends will understand our actions and our life, even when you do not agree with our theories. I beg you to tell your students that for many of us, there never has been a more passionate assertion of our faith in God as Creator than this revolt against despair, not only against physical death, but against spiritual and intellectual death. Tell them we may not talk their language about God and religion and the church. Tell them we cannot argue, but we live by an experience, and that experience is the determination to show there is purpose and meaning in life, and that we all know now we have a part to play. As Wilhelm left me, I crossed the cathedral and sat there for some time thinking, and there came to me the memory of something that a very wise old German statesman had said to me a week or two earlier, and which I had not understood at the time. "The really tragic thing about this movement," he said, "is that I believe it must end in war. There will of course be political incidents that lead on to war, but actually below all that, I believe that there is a kind of momentum, or if you like, hysteria in this movement, and in the devotion of many of its individual members, that will drive them to some kind of ultimate sacrifice. Something has got hold of them that will hurl them to death as the final surrender to their devotion. Perhaps you think I am talking nonsense, but I am convinced that what I say is true, although I find it difficult to put it into words that will make it sound sensible. The reasons the politician and the historian, unless they are very profound, will give for the next war will be the superficial reasons. Below all these, there is a philosophy leading to destruction." That afternoon, as the light streamed through the glorious windows of Cologne Cathedral, I sat and thought of Wilhelm, and felt that he too had committed himself to destruction, and I began to see what the German statesman meant.